Let's see here. All right. So I'm here to talk again about an industry braced for a tech revolution. And so as I was sharing, good, um, that, we've heard a lot about digital fabrication and Internet of Things, robotics, and a lot of the ways that these technologies are starting to change the way that we do things. So beforehand, I was actually going to make the presentation about as quick as it went and just say ditto, and then have everyone break for, the time. But, going to go a little bit more into this. So as was up here earlier, so this is the right slide, I spend a decent amount of my time kind of divided among two areas in the Bay Area. There on the right, or your left, I have spent the longest with a group called the Web3D Consortium, which I said comes with my interest in open standards for the 3D web. And so this is an organization that's been around for 20 years, right? 3D on the web has been around since '94, essentially when Sir Tim Berners-Lee was defining the internet. There was a standard called VRML, which is an export format out of some of your tools. And then, of course, being a good San Franciscan, I got involved back in 2008 with a company that looked to use essentially video game-like technologies and robotics to build houses. And then about a year ago, I decided to join another little Korean startup and work in their research lab there in the Silicon Valley area. And then, of course, being a sucker for community and then also believing in empowering developers and people who want to use technology, I run a variety of different meetup groups in the Bay Area around things like WebGL, WebVR, and some of these others. And what's cool for me is, again, I'm at that mecca center of seeing where technology and innovation from all around the world comes. So here we go. So in the daytime, again, with Samsung Internet, bet most people didn't know that Samsung actually had an internet browser, but they do. And it's been an experience for me. It's the browser that you'll see. It looks like a little Saturn icon there. It's the one that works on the mobile devices and then also in VR. And that's what I focus on as a product manager actually on the Samsung Internet team, is looking at the virtual reality and augmented reality, or as I like to call them, Immersive Technologies section of the browser. And so these are just some of the different commercials, of course, that you see. The one on the left shows some of the additional features that we have that are offered through device integration and others. And of course, the bottom right is kind of a fun one that shows what the virtual reality headset experience is more like. But work for me, please. And now the clicker. All right, here we go. All right. So I'm really interested in the research lab, though, and my personal focus and why I'm excited about what I do is coming from a web background and then focusing on enterprise for my entire career. I have never built a game, right? But having a background in open standards, I've talked to every industry that you can think of. All right, so it's not just building. And so what's been important for me and what's been fun with Samsung is you look at the way that the different browsers, it works across a variety of different devices, right? We have, for the browser itself, 450 million installs, right? So you definitely have to think different when you're looking at scale like that. As far as VR devices go, outside of the ones that are cardboard, right, we have 5 million plus of these out in the market. So the existing user install base is pretty high and pretty exciting. And then, on the top right there is, to sound like a total commercial, but I love it, is the DeX docking station. And so what this is you can essentially take an S8 phone or the Note, slide it in, and it gives you a whole different desktop type experience. And what we're running there actually is Autodesk's Forge platform. So this is really great if you're in construction or others. You don't want to carry around a laptop, which I don't want to do. You can run PowerPoint, Excel, all those other fun things in addition to web applications. Now, the thing that really excites me, though, and this is what I think is important, is the different integration that we have with other Samsung services. So what you see here is essentially called Samsung Pass. And this is the biometric, right? And this to me is very important because even though everything is awesome, people want to do nefarious things with data, okay? And I bring this up because it was shown. Now, this picture, which was pulled up, is I was informed by a gentleman that was with MI5, who I don't think it was his real name that he gave us. This is essentially a BIM model of the Victoria train station, okay? What is shown here okay? These are rooms that the public is not supposed to know exist. If you wanted to create a terrorist attack, you could actually look and see where you could release biological elements and agents. And if you looked at this enough, people that were moving in there renegotiated their lease because they had to dig up the cabling, because they do financial transactions and others. All of that was provided on where you could tap in, right? And they renegotiated because it was going to cost them £1 million to dig that up, because this one image went online. So for me, it's not just about BIM. It's about biometrics for very secure BIM, right? It's about web applications that as these technologies mature, how do we at Samsung, with things like our Knox security and these other devices, make sure that when you're accessing data, when you're using it, that the people who are using it and supposed to see it are the people that are supposed to be looking at that data, right? Because not everyone has the best intentions in mind. And then, as I said earlier, we have a completely different division of Samsung C&T that does a lot of construction. And then stepping back, what brought me into this, as I shared through almost interpretive dance, was being involved with a residential construction company. So again, can't say we're doing anything super innovative. We're using CNC fabrication, which is done in most places in Europe. We're tying that with different types of technology. And then what's been fun and what I learned is, so this is a 5,000 square foot custom home in Tahoe. Being from Texas, we do not build houses with robots. But the dried in, so that's no foundation, no plumbing, that was done in 4.5 weeks, right? The next closest bid to that was several months just to stick frame. So applying those technologies that are here in Europe and that you've actually proven really are starting to change the way that Americans look to build, and that's what you're hearing with these Katera and some of these others that are looking at prefab modular. And then my job at the company, of course, was to look a little bit at, hope that video plays, how do we use that data in different ways? So everything from education, and I'm a big fan of seeing the data in one way, depending upon your comfort level with technology in the context of the task, right? So you have many different collaborators. So that's why we had things where we were taking browser-based 3D, and we were then also using augmented reality. Because if you're trying to communicate with someone back in the office, AR doesn't do that person back in the office anything, nothing for them. But the person out on the field, it does. But how do you still have those people collaborate? So that's what it was really exciting for me, is looking at interactive 3D data that is agnostic of a viewing mechanism, because that's going to change, right? And some people don't want to put a big brick on their face to begin with. So we looked at a variety of different ways to do technology, and where technology obviously kills me sometimes, Ad did the talking to the builders. Going out there and saying, look at what we did, look at what we bought, look at the widget, and then to have them push back and say, that doesn't provide value. Where's the efficiency, improved process? So that's really what I think I'm going to make a little bit more of this talk about, is looking at some of the technologies that now you've heard about, and just kind of, to be honest, be real with you about where they are. Yes, it's great in how to use them, but some of the challenges we need to look at as well. And then also to get around some of these popular phrases that we're familiar with, right? And again, I speak for a lot of what I do in the US, but I think a lot of this is sometimes global, but the industry doesn't innovate. I've heard this time and time again. The American fishing industry spends more money on R&D than the US construction, all right? The country of Finland, which is half the size of the Bay Area, spends double than we do in the US, okay? Construction is far behind, right? This is a key one. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, all right? There is no budget for R&D. I talked to one of the largest building companies on the West Coast, and the amount of money that they had would not get you a Candy Crush clone knockoff if you had built in a developing nation, right? And also, does it really provide value? And I think that's the key thing. So I do believe that, sharing a story. So I want you to kind of go with me on a vision of a world, and I am going to ask you to definitely brace yourself. So as shared, the world is going 3D. Everything is. And it's so neat to see things like BIMobject, where as a person who wanted good 3D data, now I have a library to be able to go and do that. And thank you, building product manufacturers, for those in the audience that are actually supplying nerds like myself with those things to be able to make very accurate simulations, because that's what I care about, a digital reality. And so we're going to start from the ground up, right? We're seeing some very interesting uses of the ways that, digital globes and whatnot are being created. Everything from being able to get better terrain data and maps, all the way to tiling globes. And so what's interesting about this, if anyone's familiar with Google Earth for quite some time, you would remember that when you would zoom in, you'd see the tiles catching up with the zoom, right? And that's what this is. Essentially, it's a globe, a sphere that works on a quad tree system. And what's neat is now you can own this. So this is a project done by that consortium I spoke about, where essentially you have royalty-free standards to where now in your BIM model, if you wanted to, you could put a whole tiling globe underneath that with the actual terrain data that you get as well. And we're starting to see people create these digital worlds to a degree like Singapore with their virtual Singapore initiative, right? They worked with Dassault Systems, spent about $75 million to create a really great detailed model of Singapore. And then, moving then to, Realty Capture. The cost of this are dropping, right? And what's even better is that getting those point cloud data into tools that you can use to then provide for visualization technologies is also becoming more smooth. And I highly recommend, if anyone gets the opportunity to, there is a conference that the previous presenter, Autodesk, they put on called Real. And I highly recommend that if you're ever, and I think it's going to be in Las Vegas this year, but wherever it is, go to it. Because they have done a really good job of showing how reality capture data can be used in other areas, including virtual reality and others. And so what we're seeing here is everything like the backpacks now from Leica and some other startups to where you can walk through and scan. Things like the Matterport camera, of course, which give you nice things. Faro, which is a little bit more on the high-end side. And then, of course, we're seeing drones. And then what we're starting to see in the devices are additional sensors that allow for mapping of indoor spaces. And we're also seeing this in virtual reality headsets, and I'll get into that in a moment. So the fun thing is computer vision is getting better. And the sensors are getting better that are going into the phones that are now making this an in-your-pocket scanner, right? And that's also what's very exciting. Taking one step next up from that, building from the ground up, of course, I won't go too long into this, but the thing that makes me so excited about this is it is a single source of truth, right? Again, I came in working with fabricators. To me, that was the best data. It wasn't just geometry. It was geometry that had intelligence. It was geometry that had machine code. I like to think of it as like a partner. Yes, you want them to look pretty, but you want them to have brains also, right? So that, to me, what was very important about, this type of data is that finally we were getting to that point to where it was intelligent and smart. And then, of course, digital fabrication. Now, it's great to see that someone referenced Bill Chrysler and what they did at the SF MoMA. That was a really fascinating testament to what can be done with digital fabrication. And if everyone's ever up in Napa, I highly recommend you take a visit up to Chrysler's factory because they really are doing some amazing projects. If anyone else has ever been to San Francisco, you may be familiar with the big bow that's shooting an arrow into the ground in front of the Gap building. That also was done by Chrysler, looking at composites. Of course, our friends over at Arup were the structural engineers on record that did this fantastic timber structure in Spain. And then, 3D printing and others. Now, I think that these things are exciting. But 3D printing, if anyone has ever run a 3D printer, you know that those heads never mess up. I hear some people then obviously have worked with 3D printers. For those that haven't, that was sarcasm, okay? So, also, think about the amount of energy that it requires to power something like that. You can only print components as big as the machine itself. So now, going beyond the isn't that cool? Plus, raise your hand in here. Who would live in a concrete house? 3, 4. All right, awesome. But look at the room that didn't, right? So very fascinating stuff. But again, right, let's go with what we know and what has been proven very well, which is subtractive. Now, of course, when it comes to robotics, this is what's been interesting, is that you see now where, like, this is recent. You had AI that designed, and then robotics that built this house. And I didn't go much into AI, too much into this, but it's been very interesting to see the ways that robotics are changing the landscape of the job site, and that KUKA and others are starting to make this stuff very, very easy to do. Of course, we have the immersive technologies, as was talked about. You look at ways of getting essentially virtual reality is changing the job site, augmented reality. This is a very interesting example of where essentially augmented reality helped still framing. It teaches you how to do still framing using the HoloLens and things like that. Let's see here. Awesome. And then the web. The web is changing out in the job site. Now it's a little bit more difficult to get web out to every job site, but this is a company called HoloBuilder that's using very good examples of 360 images. Also, you have BuilderBox, which is kind of like your Facebook of construction management as well. You have great things like the Forge platform that are coming out that are allowing for 3D to run natively in the browser. And then also you have WebVR, which is now virtual reality running in the web. So you no longer have to ask a client, download this app, install this app, go get your IT to do this. You can send them a URL. And then what's really fascinating about that is the way that then that ties into IoT. So that last image that popped up there actually is a web VR or web 3D experience, depending upon how you're viewing it, that actually communicates to that Lego bridge and then the Arctic sensors that are on that bridge. So now you have IoT connected directly to Web 3D and Web VR for a good representation. And that leads to then to this Internet of Things, where we're starting to see smart job sites. And not just for being able to monitor, are you walking into an area that you don't need to be into, right? But then also using the biometrics of, are people tired? Are they high at risk? And then also, where are they? Are they slacking on the job site? That guy hasn't moved for 30 minutes. He's dead or on break, right? So there's a lot of ways that then the data is starting to be used from these interconnected parts. So probably by this time in the day, you're feeling a little bit like this, right? And then definitely probably a little bit more like this. But in conclusion, I'll say, why does this matter? And because where we are is the reality of a smart connected everything. It's coming. And we're there as Samsung, right? For sure. And we're not the only ones. What's also neat is that now we're seeing the future that is being built in the most innovative of ways. And then what's the most important is that you have back to that single source of truth from where your data is coming from. And so I ask in my final few slides that I'll click through quickly because everyone's been more than patient with giving me time. You can either innovate or you can be this guys. But this is happening, okay? And so this is what you really have to think about. So I give a call to action. If anyone's interested, I highly recommend get involved in things like these hackathons that are specifically for your building industry and others. And then with that, it's no longer about an industry brace for tech revolution, but one that is an experiencing one. So, thank you.